Thank you kindly. It's a great pleasure and honor to be with you again. And during today, we're going to look critically at the fundamental relationship between the Atma, or the fourth state of consciousness, Samadhi, and what physicists describe as the unified field, the universal field of intelligence that gives rise to the universe. So it's called, is consciousness the unified field? Field theorists' perspective. In our discussion yesterday of higher states of consciousness, I rather casually presented the identification of, you could say, Atman with Brahm. That means pure consciousness, the self, the transcendental self, and the unified field at the source of the multiplicity of the universe identified by modern science. To review, we summarized the physical science's systematic exploration of deeper and deeper levels of reality, from the classical to the quantum mechanical to the quantum field theoretic world of elementary particles, and ultimately to the unified field, which is the unified source of all the diverse laws of nature and all the diverse particles and forces that fill the universe. And the fundamental principles that govern the universe at every level have their unified source in this unified field, or in today's parlance, superstring theory, superstring field. This discovery of unity by modern science at the basis of the surface diversity, surface complexity of the universe is not just a philosophical development. It's a precise mathematical discovery with predictive power that makes definite statements about the nature of the universe. And what it says about the structure of the universe is that at its foundation, it is a field of absolute silence, Lorentz invariance, and non-changing, immortal field, which, due to quantum mechanics, is constantly reverberating within itself, filled with unmanifest dynamism. And it's this intrinsic dynamism of the field that causes the field to erupt, to effervesce billions of effervescent bubbles, which are called superstrings, one-dimensional elastic loops of infinitesimal size. These infinitesimal elastic loops have specific vibrational frequencies, like a rubber band can vibrate in different frequencies, but these are quantum rubber bands, so that the frequencies are quantized, specific, innumerable, calculable. And the specific vibrational tones of these superstrings, or the specific vibrational tones of the unified field, manifest as the fundamental particles and forces of nature. The photon of electromagnetism, the field of gravity, the strong and weak nuclear forces, the electrons and the neutrinos and so forth, all the so-called building blocks that comprise our universe are not material obstacles or particles. They are the fundamental reverberant frequencies or resonant tones of this universal ocean of intelligence, ocean of existence, ocean of being. Then we took a quick look yesterday at the nature of consciousness. And we expanded our consideration of consciousness from the typical subject of Western psychology, which is basically waking consciousness, which is a very active and complex, we go back to waking consciousness, which is a very activated, very agitated, very concrete style of functioning of the brain, where we are aware of concrete objects, concrete thoughts, sensory sensations. But we took the yogic, and this is not just true of the yoga system, but this was the first, I think, and most profound of the meditative traditions, took a look from the perspective of yoga at what meditation fundamentally means. And from the perspective of yoga, meditation is a technique or techniques to take the outwardly directed, sharply focused attention and turn the attention powerfully within to experience and explore deeper levels of mind, quieter and quieter levels of the thinking process, until the mind, having been drawn completely within, comes to rest at the state of absolute abstraction, ajantapav. You could say total annihilation of any relative experience. This is a state of consciousness that is unbounded, abstract. It does not involve noticing or attending to anything. It is a relaxation of the process of attending to become purely non-attentive, non-noticing, unbounded awareness. And in the Vedic literature of yoga, the expression is yogaschita vritti nirodha. Yoga is the complete settling of activity of the mind. Then the seer is established in the self, the Atma. Now, this is an ancient wisdom, but it is also a modern scientific discovery or rediscovery in the world of physiology and neurophysiology. This fourth state of consciousness, the meditative state, different from waking, dreaming, and sleeping, it has its own style of physiological and neurophysiological functioning, characterized by very deep rest in the body, but a wide awake and coherent state of abstract awareness. Different states of mind, different levels of cognitive processing from active to silent to transcendental, have their own style of electrophysiological functioning. And Samadhi, the fourth state of consciousness, is characterized by alpha-1, high-amplitude alpha-1 global EEG coherence where the whole brain functions in concert. A fourth state of human consciousness with significant benefits for the development of the mind, the development of the brain, the development of health, the prevention of disease, and so forth, as we said yesterday. Now, the subject of today is this state of unbounded awareness, the pure transcendental self, the pure intelligence at the basis of the mind from which thoughts and impulses and desires emerge, is that unified foundation of mind the same as this unified field, the unified foundation, the field of nature's intelligence from which the universe emerges? That was the statement yesterday. I'm going to review that now more carefully. And if it is, how can the brain possibly access it? A separate but equally important question from the standpoint of neuroscience and quantum neurology. Firstly, I should say, to a field theorist, this identification of pure consciousness with a unified field is rather natural. To many, I think, though, it is understandably difficult to comprehend. And the reason for that is physical scientists are used to studying the physical world. And to them, after 300 years of this, since Newton at least, the external world is physical, lifeless, inert matter. But consciousness is subjectivity, and wavering, perhaps, in some respects, unreliable. Certainly waking consciousness is very unreliable. So physicists have tried to remove consciousness as far as possible from the subject of study. So there's been, in a sense, an exclusion and even an unwillingness to think about consciousness in the physical scientific community. But quantum mechanics has long told us that deeper levels of nature are non-physical. Even the world of molecules and atoms, the world of quantum mechanics, if you leave an atom by itself, isolated from the environment, that atom will show that it is actually just a wave, a so-called wave function that spreads and becomes more diffuse. And that wave function is a non-physical thing. It is a vector in a linear space. That means fundamentally electrons, atoms, are made of the same stuff that thoughts are made of. So physics has long really left behind the idea of an objective, locally real universe, and have accepted the fact that universe is, in some strange respect, a conceptual reality. Quantum field theory and unified field theory clarify that little bit of vagueness there to show that to answer what is the wave function? What is it a wave of? Is it a wave of water? Is it a wave of air vibration? No. It is a wave, a fluctuation of this unified field. A universal field of intelligence rises in waves of vibration, and those waves of vibration are the particles and forces and ultimately the universe. As you go deeper into nature, there is increasing dynamism, more vitality, more concentrated intelligence. The compact laws governing the unified field, which can be written in one stroke, contain within them and allow us to derive all the more complex laws governing the grand unified level, the electroweakly unified, the nuclear level, the atomic physics, molecular physics, chemistry. They all emerge from this most compact, most concentrated field of intelligence at the foundation of nature. And this field is dynamically self-aware, self-interacting. Unlike light, the photon, light is unaware of light. Two flashlight beams pass right through each other with no scattering, no interaction, no awareness of each other's presence. But the unified field is different. It's a highly non-abelian, nonlinear field, which means it responds dynamically to its own presence. It interacts dynamically with itself, and due to that dynamical self-interaction, sequentially brings forth the multiplicity of the universe. So what do we have? The unified field is an infinitely dynamic, non-material field of self-interacting intelligence, which is about the best definition of consciousness I've ever heard. Now, you could take this description of the unified field and make it more and more compelling that this unified field is indeed a field of consciousness, and we could spend all day looking at its fundamental properties derived from its mathematical structure and relating those to consciousness. But physicists are allergic to such discussion because it's prone to semantics, and I think philosophers would have this is a fertile field for rich philosophical discussion, but there are better arguments for physical scientists. And one of those is the quantitative structure of the unified field matches the quantitative structure of pure consciousness. And let me try and briefly describe what that means. The unified field, like any field, has its natural reverberant frequencies, like a guitar string has its natural reverberant frequencies. Those reverberant frequencies we've already described as the fundamental particles and forces of nature. Those frequencies, of course, are scientifically well known. They are calculable from the string and measurable in the laboratory as the elementary particles of nature. And to summarize, emerging from this abstract ocean of vibrant, reverberating, abstract, universal intelligence, the superstring field, we have certain vibrational tones, fundamentally three, which go by the names gravity superfield, gauge superfield, and matter superfields. But the gravity, gauge, and matter fields are themselves composed of what is called the spin-2 graviton, the force of gravity, its supersymmetric partner, the gravitino, the spin-1 forces, like electromagnetism, the spin-1 half matter fields, like the electron, and the newly discovered spin-0 Higgs boson. Those are the fundamental reverberant frequencies of the unified field which emerge, and which appear as the material universe. That structure is not unfamiliar from the Vedic science and Vedic cosmology. These five are sometimes called the Panchamahabhutas. In this particular context, it would be more correct to call these tanmatras. And these five fundamental elements or ingredients from which the universe is fabricated actually do combine in the Vedic literature. You see this in Hridayam Samhita, you see it in Ayurveda. They combine into these more holistic entities called, in physics, the superfields, but in the literature of the Veda, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. These are the first sprouting of the material reality from the non-material field of consciousness in the Vedic science. Now, you don't have to merely, and by the way, there is a very profound correspondence between these 5 tanmatras and the 5 quantum mechanical spin types, spin 2 through spin 0. Firstly, this same pairing that we've just described of the tanmatras into prakritis is also found in physics. As we saw before, these 2 spin types combine to form gravity superfield, these 2 to form gauge superfields, these 2 to form matter superfields, and only those combinations are allowed, are mathematically consistent, are quantum mechanically consistent. So there's a very interesting numerical correspondence between the vibrational structure of Brahm, of the unified field, and the vibrational structure of consciousness. Now, you can either go to the literature and read about these things, or you can simply submerge yourself deeply in Samadhi, and settling deeply into that state, begin to discover within that it is humming, that it is alive with vibrations, including the sounds that we heard about this morning from our distinguished host and professor. So it's an ocean, a sea of vibration. And a little bit of familiarity with that allows you to actually see and hear the structure of those vibrations. And this is the structure that you find. In the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, chapter 3, is a meditative technique called sanyama, defined as the simultaneity of dharan, dhyan, and samadhi. Easier to do than to explain. But in sanyama, what you can do one by one is strum the fundamental frequencies of pure consciousness. And you can listen to the frequencies of pure consciousness, exciting the field of the Atma into its fundamental reverberant modes. And you will discover through that process, again, that there are 5 fundamental frequencies of consciousness, the Mahabhutas and the Tanmatras, that have to do with the emergence of the physical body and the physical universe. So can't dwell on this for too long, but this is a significant numerical correspondence. And the correspondence goes deeper than this, but a little bit beyond, I think, the time we have today. Because in addition to what are called these, the so-called massless modes of the string, there is a whole symphony of massive string modes that have nothing to do with the material universe, but are the inner vibrational tones of consciousness. Or in the case of the superstring, just the inner vibrational modes of the unified field. And the unified field, in the process of expressing itself as the physical universe, undergoes a series of transformations from what is called the 10-dimensional superstring to the 26-dimensional heterotic string to the 64-dimensional formulation of the string in 4 dimensions, it's called. And there's a definite sequence of expression of fundamental unity to the surface diversity of the world. And all of this happens before the material universe or the material particles emerge. If we had a lot of time, we could explain how 8 becomes 24, how 24 becomes 64, and that has to do with taking the extra dimensions of space that live in the superstring theory, that the superstring theory requires. When you get rid of the unwanted dimensions of space, because we only see 3 plus 1 of time, that spindles the extra dimensions into microscopic tubes with a very rich topological structure. And superstrings get wound around these extra dimensions of space, and they increase the number of vibrational modes of the string from 24 to 64. And once you have a 64-stringed instrument, which is what we have at this stage in the emergence of the string, then once you have a piano or a guitar with 64 strings, then you can calculate the number of vibrational tones that such a complex instrument will support. And when you do that, you get 192. And there's several more gyrations the string goes through. But I will just mention that From the standpoint of consciousness, this is deeply, deeply transcendental consciousness reverberating within itself. These are the vrittis of Atma. The abstract, self-interacting dynamics of the unified field of consciousness. You have this same unfoldment of 8 to 24 to 64 to 192 as Atma leads to the emergence of concrete thoughts and feelings. This whole thing, again, can be probed experientially, although I think you'd have to be quite an advanced yogi to fathom all of that. But it is also recorded in the Vedic literature, in the foundational document of the Vedic literature, the Sanghita of the Ved, or Rig Ved. Rig Ved really is, in a sense, the fountainhead of all the Vedic literature. You can take the Upaveds, the Upangas, and the Vedangas, and the Itihasi, and the Upanishads, and the Smritis, and the Aranyakas, and everything really emerges, unfolds from the Rig Ved. And the Rig Ved really is the constitution of the universe, the blueprint of creation. It's the reverberant structure of the Atma. But in any case, it's all there. And you see in the structure of the Rig Ved that a sequentially unfolding, self-elaborating, self-commenting, expansionary process of unity to multiplicity. And that's in a definite sequence. There's the first syllable. There's the first pada, 8 syllables. First 24 syllables, that's the first richa. First 64 syllables. First 192 syllables, that's the first sukta. Like that, the same numerical sequence of expression of unity to diversity is seen. So this quantitative correspondence between the structure of the unified field unfolded by superstring theory and the structure of the unified field that can be found embedded within the field of pure consciousness are structurally, quantitatively identical. And that, for a physical scientist, is a quite strong argument of the identity of pure consciousness unified field. It's interesting to look now at the structure of the human nervous system just in passing, and how the human nervous system seems to have been crafted to resonate, to reverberate in the structure of Veda, to reverberate in the structure of wholeness, with its 192 ascending and descending reticular formations or nerve endings, the gateways to consciousness, and other features of the structure of the nervous system make it seem as though we are hardwired to resonate in the structure of universal wholeness, to experience the unified field. Next argument, moving quickly towards more empirical side. I want to mention a phenomenon that I think most of us are familiar with through a variety of types of experiment, and I would call these long-range field effects of consciousness. Evidence of consciousness as a field. Some such studies involve groups of yogis, groups of meditating experts, practicing these techniques of transcending and the siddhis from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and experiencing not only profound calm and deep silence within oneself, but a spillover effect into the surrounding society, which can be measured in terms of reduced societal stress and chaos, increased calm, reduced crime and social violence. Well, that, in its day, was a startling hypothesis and has since been subject to extensive scientific research. One of the earliest of these, published in the Yale Journal of Conflict Resolution, probably the best journal in the world on conflict, took one group over a period of several months and increased and reduced and increased and reduced the size of the meditating group, shown as a dashed line, and embedded this group in Jerusalem during the peak of the Lebanon War. And what was observed is, in a strong, fairly strongly statistically significant way, is that when the numbers of meditators were large, there were marked reductions in the levels of violence as measured by war deaths, war injuries, bombs dropped, bullets fired, and progress towards peace among the negotiating factions. That was a startling kind of historic result, and since has been subject to almost innumerable replications, actually more like 54 published replications at this time. And when that's been repeated, even in the Middle East, when the Yale University editors of the journal charged the scientific community to repeat the study because the results were so unusual and the size of the effect so large, 80% drop in war deaths, they said this is a little hard to believe, and if it's true, it's highly important. So please, other groups, repeat the study. And that was done over the next 2 years. Repetitions of that study were done, and every one had a highly statistically significant effect, reducing, again, levels of violence by approximately 80% during periods where the groups were, meditating groups were of sufficient size to produce the desirable. This result, published eventually in the Journal of Social Behavior and Personality, was remarkably statistically significant. And this, combined with more than 50 other studies, makes this phenomenon of the calming effect and the peace-promoting effect of collective experience of yoga, the transcendent, a scientific fact. And that has resulted in some groups around the world trying to create such meditating groups on a permanent basis, including an increasing number of militaries in quite a few countries in the world, trying to create a peacekeeping force within the military to try to prevent the outbreak of violence and war, and ultimately to the creation of a supergroup here in India, Ved Bhumi Bharat, where the central campus in the Brahmastan, or geographic center of India, and thousands of Vedic pundits who were trained, since it is deeply within the tradition of the Vedic pundits to dedicate time towards both meditation and Vedic recitation, or yajna. And here's a quote in the Yoga Sutras about the effects of group practice. It says, Tat sanidau vairet yaga. In the vicinity of yoga, of the transcendent, hostile tendencies are eliminated. All right, so we have field effects of consciousness. What does that have to do with pure consciousness as the unified field? Well, we have field effects of consciousness. How can you explain that? And this is important because it requires a whole new paradigm of consciousness. There are no classical mechanisms involving physical contact or shouting, across the continents to affect other people's behavior. This is really action at significant distance. Quantum mechanics provides one viable mechanism for long-range societal coherence with some great advantages and also a few challenges. And so, unified field theory, which is after all a version of quantum mechanics, has perhaps even more plausible explanations for the long-range spreading of societal coherence. And I'll just show you in a flash. Structure of space-time geometry is flat. But due to quantum fluctuations, which get more important at deeper and deeper levels, at the nuclear level, if you look very closely at the structure of space-time, you may be able to discern some rippling in the background of space-time geometry. This is called zero-point motion. And if you go all the way to the level of super unification, the unified field, space-time is a state of constant total upheaval. This is the space-time froth that was described by somebody yesterday. So within this space-time froth, you have appearance of what are called micro-black holes, singularities. You have the appearance of what are called topological fluctuations, or wormholes. As the universe expands during the Big Bang, this structure gets stretched to macroscopic sizes, leaving in the universe today macroscopic wormholes that connect our universe at distances. We can't calculate how many of these there are, or how dense these wormholes are, without knowing exactly how much inflation took place. But they're likely to exist in very significant number, and provide, in addition to normal signal propagation through flat space, a shortcut, a backdoor, through which information can travel instantaneously at large distances. This might even be involved in the phenomenon of the collapse of the wave function, but that's very speculative work. In any case, the point is, at the level of the unified field, there are natural mechanisms that could explain the long-range field effects of consciousness, suggesting or supporting the contention that pure consciousness is the unified field. I'll mention extremely briefly that in every culture, in the Vedic culture, in the culture of yoga, of Buddhism, of Christianity, there are great yogis or great saints or great avatars that have certain so-called supernormal abilities, siddhis. One of the ones most talked about is the phenomenon of levitation and levitating saints and levitating yogis. If such a phenomenon is demonstrated under appropriate circumstances, is sufficiently demonstrated, this is how it works. Gravity is the result of the curvature of space. That's why the moon orbits the Earth. The curvature of space has its classical value, but deeper and deeper levels of space-time structure show that space is in a continuous state of upheaval. Now, when you go from the microscopic to the macroscopic, an averaging process occurs in which this fine detail gets progressively washed out, smeared out, averaged out. So space-time looks macroscopically flat, but that's just because our eyes work slowly, and the camera clicks very slowly on the time scale of the Planck scale, the time scale of vacuum fluctuations. So we don't see the effects of the underlying fluctuations. But if consciousness can function consciously at the level of the unified field, and if in this chaotic sea of infinitesimal fluctuations at the level of the unified field, some purposefulness, some sustained, coherent influence of intention can be applied, very quickly, even a minute influence, if applied in a sustained way, will quickly bubble up onto the surface of life as a major change in the macroscopic curvature of space, which could cause us to fall upward, fall forward, fall in any direction we wish. And we now have evidence in the laboratory that functioning on the level of the quantum fluctuations of the space-time foam has dramatic consequences. The so-called dark energy is nothing but the fluctuations of the vacuum, and that dark energy, the fluctuations of the vacuum, are enough to change the curvature of space, firstly, to cause the Big Bang. This is an anti-gravitational force, the vacuum fluctuations. And that caused the expansion and the emergence of the universe during the Big Bang. And even today, the persistence of some amount of dark energy is causing the universe to continue to expand. This is a brand new experimental finding, and it's amazing, but it just shows that functioning from the level of the unified field, you can do anything. So, quick summary, and then one last point. We've looked at various arguments that are often advanced in favor of the identity of pure consciousness, the Atman, and Brahman, universal intelligence, the unified field. We looked at a quantitative correspondence very briefly. We looked at experimentally confirmed field effects of consciousness. We examined the possibility that any of the siddhis really, once demonstrated, would unambiguously place consciousness on the level of the unified field. And we didn't talk about it today, but it's been discussed at the conference already. There are problems explaining consciousness as a derivative of matter, already requiring a more fundamental view. Based on what we know and what we think we know today about physics, Atman is Brahman, is really the simplest, most sensible, most parsimonious answer. For my friends who are involved in research into neuroscience and quantum neurology, let me first ask quickly a final question. How? How can the human brain access the unified field? How can the human brain access deeper and deeper levels of nature? Well, we know in a sense that it can. All these deeper levels of mind and the more comprehensive, abstract, and profound mathematical frameworks that exist at these deeper, more expansive levels of mind correspond perfectly to the functioning of nature, as Wigner himself remarked some years ago. And that relationship between the levels of mind and the levels of matter can be made quite rigorous. But the question still remains, how? To what extent is the brain quantum mechanical? To what extent is it so deeply quantum mechanical? Well, in short, several mechanisms have already been identified at this conference, quantum mechanical mechanisms functioning at the cellular and subcellular level. So we are at least halfway there. How can we expand access of the mind at the quantum mechanical level to the quantum field theory and unified field theoretic levels? I would like to leave you with this thought. This was introduced by Stuart Hameroff yesterday, but not really picked up on. This is something physical scientists rarely discuss, and that is the subtle body or thought body. Imagine, in addition to our classical nervous system, physical nervous system, we had a quantum mechanical nervous system, a thought body, a subtle body that could easily access and interface with the deepest levels of nature. Well, there's a lot of empirical evidence for such a body. Probably many people in this room have had absolutely lucid experiences of consciousness beyond the physical body. And for anyone who's had such an experience, nobody telling you, 100 people telling you it's a dream, it's a self-hypnosis, doesn't work at all. The lucidity and reality of that experience is every bit as lucid and undeniable as normal waking consciousness. So there's plenty of evidence for it, but the idea has been rejected by physical scientists so far simply because physically it can't exist until now. Now, what does that mean? The understanding has been that it cannot exist because if we take the known forces and particles of nature, there's nothing that works that could behave like such a body. It's not made of light, even though it's sometimes called the light body. If it were made of photons, it would disperse at the speed of light. It's not made of charged particles. Neutrinos don't hold together. Electrons are charged, but would be swept away in the presence of a cell phone or an electric field or a magnetic field. None of that works. And that's one of the reasons it has not been taken seriously. But what has happened is that the superstring predicts, requires, that in addition to the normal particles and forces that we know and love, there's a whole other set of fundamental particles and forces called hidden sector matter. And all the details of that hidden sector matter, these are particles and forces that fill this room, that occupy our own space. But we don't see them. That's why it's called hidden, sometimes called shadow matter, because they don't interact with us except via gravity, which is hopelessly, uselessly weak. However, more recent and better calculations of the relationship or interaction of shadow matter with our normal matter show that they do interact electromagnetically. Shadow matter particles have what it's called fractional electric charge. Electric charge that is less than 1/100th, probably less than 1/1000th of the electron charge. So it interacts with us, but weakly, so that we could peer into this world, but dimly. That world has its own light, maybe you could call it spiritual light, that we can't see through our physical eyes. First point. Can such shadow matter exist? If you look at the experimental constraints on the presence of such weakly electrically charged particles, they are very minimal. We have some constraints from particle accelerators, some constraints from Big Bang nucleosynthesis, but there's this whole region of parameter space, and this whole mass range from the electron mass up to the proton mass, up to much, much higher, where these fractionally charged particles could exist. Why are they relevant to the subtle body? Because it's the perfect physical explanation for the behavior of such a body. Firstly, This matter interacts weakly with us. Not so weak as to be irrelevant, but weakly enough that we can't see it, not easily, not with our eyes. This hidden sector matter is highly coherent because it is extremely cold. It would be at an estimated 2 degrees of absolute zero and display all kinds of interesting quantum coherent effects, like a macroscopic superfluid effect. In particular, they bind into human-sized solitons. That means bodies. A soliton is a self-organizing, self-sustaining, stable system with a very rich internal dynamics due to its superconducting nature that could provide a very interesting vehicle for thought that would accompany or support the physical brain. And most importantly, why I was excited about this finding is that this hidden sector matter is scale invariant below 10 to the minus 7th centimeters. It means below about the size of the electron wavelength. And why is that important? It's important because we can already understand the ability of the mechanisms of the brain and the microtubule and similar to interact intimately with scales on the order of 10 to the minus 5, 10 to the minus 6 centimeters. But from that point on, we can interface with what is called the subtle body or thought body. And the thought body doesn't care, because this matter is scale invariant. It is absolutely size independent. It can communicate as easily with our physical brain as it can communicate with the Planck scale, and provides, in a sense, a natural funnel through which the consciousness of the yogi, going deeper and deeper and deeper, can fathom the extreme limits of the physical universe within. So, to summarize, subtle body made of shadow matter provides a natural link between our physical brain and the deepest level of nature, the unified field. And I doubt we will probably ever truly, fully understand consciousness if we fail to incorporate the subtle body into our discussion. Final conclusion, is pure consciousness the unified field? We have described too briefly some powerful arguments in favor of that identity, on the basis of which, again, I would conclude the simplest, I believe, most plausible explanation is that Atman is Brahman, that the self and the cosmic self are identical. Thank you.
Any question?
Professor Hagelin, a wonderful lecture, but I had a couple of points. First of all, science is a conversation, and this is wonderful, very suggestive. There is a possible solution to this very difficult question that we have been looking at. But one problem that a lot of physicists have with string theory is that it's not predictive, that it has 10 to the power 500 solutions, and there are so many different variables that you can do whatever you want. So that's one. The other is, what about the Upanishadic view that para cannot be captured by language? That apara, which is the science of the objects of the phenomenal world, and physics, of course, deals with the phenomenal world, is what language can deal with. Because language is about relationships of objects. But para, which is what we are trying to incorporate into our framework, deals with the experiencing subject who is a unity, who is one. So how do you deal with this conundrum?
Okay, let me handle the second question first. It's a very, very astute, good point. The unified field is truly beyond rational comprehension. And string theorists in themselves have acknowledged this, in that M theory is a loose collection of perspectives that severally, or I would say jointly, illuminate the unified field like different flashlights shining a multifaceted diamond. No perspective really captures it. And you can take, group theory, category theory, topos theory, the cryptic semantics of the topos and everything. And by the way, it all helps. There's really no coherent mathematical thought that has ever been thunk, that does not shed some light, is not incorporated and used in superstring theory. But those rational perspectives individually are completely inadequate to capture the wholeness of a concept. It's bigger than any concept. The Atman is bigger than any distinction that the Buddha can make. So you're quite right. And the mathematics of this really helps simply illuminate it and shed some rational light on it. But ultimately, this is an experience, and really, apart from that, nothing else matters much. In terms of the predictability of string theory, I'll just quickly say, a lot has been said of that, but you can generate string theories, string models by the thousands with the aid of a computer, and you find repeatable predictions tending to come out again and again and again. So that vast universe of string vacua hasn't been very thoroughly explored, to say the least. But attempts to explore it seem to find, for example, the existence of 3 generations of fermions seems so far to be pretty consistent. The mass ratio between the bottom quark and the tau lepton at 2.7 seems to be a fairly consistent prediction. And other predictions like that, or postdictions like that, are coming out of it. So it's true, our ability to calculate with string theory is in its infancy, rather embarrassingly primitive. But what we can do today really is kind of almost already enough to make the key conclusions.
One more question there. Just one more. Yeah, please.
Thank you, John. I'm very sympathetic to your overall view, but have a few quibbles since I follow Penrose physics rather than string theory. 2 comments. I wouldn't rule out gravity, or particularly quantum gravity, despite its weakness, for 2 reasons. Number one, if it's influencing collapse, reduction by objective reduction, it's instantaneous. So you have a very weak energy over an infinitely small time, instantaneous. So you have a high power.
Okay, let's pause there. I am highly sympathetic and very excited by this work with Penrose on looking at quantum gravitational dynamics for the collapse of the wave function. I'm not saying that's irrelevant. By saying that pure consciousness is the unified field, I'm saying the same thing, because the unified field is the domain of quantum gravity, and I'm saying that's where the action is. That's where consciousness really is. What I said was a little bit different, though. I said that the ability to interact with a subtle body via the gravitational force would not be productive. You need a stronger connection, or there's no way it'll hang around. That's all. It's a different application. It's a macroscopic application of gravity that is so weak.
Well, you get around that by identifying a biological structure, such as a microtubule. But the other point is that early on, I think you clarified this later, you said, I think, unified field theory influences consciousness, or consciousness influences, but yet they're the same. So, and then later you talk about solitons. So could we be talking about self-organization within the unified field?
Absolutely. The unified field is rich with this capacity for self-organization. And in a sense, it self-organizes the whole emerging universe. So within the unified field, there's a rich capacity for self-organization, as in consciousness, this self-organization that causes this abstract, unbounded awareness to rise in the specific content of thought and speech and action. And the dynamics of those self-organizing processes seem to be the same. So it's structurally and functionally. There's a very profound relationship, which I believe is most simply described as identity, between pure consciousness and the unified field. Thank you.